Hello, everyone, and welcome to Police Off the Cuff, Real Crime Stories. I'm your host, retired NYPD Sergeant Bill Cannon, a 27-year veteran of the NYPD. You know, folks, the story that is really all over the news, you bombarded it 24/7, of course, is the Israeli Hamas conflict in Gaza. And of course, the horrific attacks that occurred on October 7th. Everyone has been sort of waiting impatiently or patiently, whichever might be your point of view, for the ground war to begin. And there are probably many reasons why it hasn't begun yet. The most important one being trying to save the lives of the hostages that are being held by Hamas. Now, the United States apparently is involved in those negotiations. And we in the Western Hemisphere, of course, value life, maybe more than some. And I think if there's any chance we can get those hostages out without more of them dying, it is worth the try. And even though no one is saying that specifically the United States is holding the IDF from going in and starting a ground war in Gaza, I think it's pretty plain to see that's the goal, is to save as many hostages as possible. But at the same time, Israel wants to get this ground war going because their goal in this war is the elimination and the complete destruction of Hamas. So with that in mind, we are, again, patiently or impatiently, whichever your point of view is, awaiting this ground war to begin. And the images from it, of course, are horrific. Some of the things we've been seeing on the news are just heinous. And this is the image that I always comes into my mind when I think of October 7th and how scary it must have been for those people at the music festival. So, folks, hold on to your hat, buckle into your seats. You're entering the police off the cuff zone, and we're going to begin in just a few minutes after our intro. There has to be some common sense.
Yes, sir. They have the car stopped at 10th and Ranch Microfly there.
We still don't know who pulled the trigger.
Folks, we're back, and let's get right into it. I have three guests, or you might call them two co-hosts, and a guest from is it the West Coast or the left coast? I don't know, but we'll call it the West Coast. But joining me straight out of Brooklyn, retired NYPD detective Phil Grimaldi. Welcome to the show tonight, Phil.
How you doing tonight, Billy?
Pretty good. And we also have with us retired NYPD Sergeant, Professor, law degree, some say priestly, Father Mike Geary.
Hey,
Mike,
Billy.
welcome to the show.
Good evening. Good to see you. Hello, Phil. How are you?
How are you, Mike?
And from the West Coast or the left coast, whatever you might say, but he's family because he's got two family members that were NYPD sergeants, his father and his brother. Welcome, retired FBI agent Bobby Chacon. Bobby, welcome to the show.
Thanks, boss. Good to see you again.
Well, you're looking very studious with those glasses on. Right. I mean, maybe like lawyerly or I don't know, professorally. I don't know what to say, but you're looking good. A lot of colors in that background.
Yeah, it's my wife's influence. This is
It's always blame it on the woman.
Yeah.
Anyway, Bobby, you know, when I was introducing the show, and I'm going to ask you this first, there's reasons why this ground war hasn't started. And I think there's, I don't know, hundreds, thousands of tanks waiting to enter Gaza. And I believe, and the news has been reporting it, is that the U.S. has a hand in that. And I think part of it is the negotiation for the hostages. They don't want to just have Israel go in there and just all the hostages are killed immediately. And what are your thoughts?
Well, I think you're exactly right, but I also think that it was a strategic move on the part of Hamas to take hostages, right? I mean, they went in there killing everybody in their path, right? So why even take hostages, right? So they're not looking to trade them for prisoners. They're not looking for money for them. There's none of the normal things that are present when you take a hostage are present here. They simply took them to push back on any invasion or any counterattack that Israel might muster. So they're using them as human shields because they're cowards. And so taking those hostages was for this specific purpose, was to delay the ground, attack, the retribution and things like that. So I think that this was a strategic point, and it's working. And quite frankly, they let two go the other day, and there was, it's almost a series of sympathetic articles or coverage that they let these two American hostages go. I mean, that should garner no sympathy from anybody. I mean, they took these hostages for a reason, and the reason was to delay Israel's strike back.
Absolutely. Professor Mike, I wanted to ask you, there's so much politics involved in this. And one of the biggest things is that is the information war. And it appears that the propaganda, let's put it the propaganda war. And it seems that Hamas is winning the propaganda war right now. And they get American broadcast companies to broadcast stories that aren't true. It really is hurtful to everyone. Mike, what's your thoughts?
Billy, there's an old saying, dates back about a century. In war, the first casualty is truth. And because everybody's looking, both sides are looking to gain the hearts and minds and the loyalty of their people and to win everyone over and maybe influence the enemy in some respects. And that's what we see here. It's quite obvious that from the moment that we saw the coverage, especially of the hospital being hit, immediately you heard 500 people dead, hospital hit by Israeli missile. Everyone jumped on it, and now everybody has to backtrack. CNN, MSNBC, they jumped all over it. Other places said a rocket attack, possibly. We don't know the source. But unfortunately, when they're competing in such a competitive market for clicks and audience share, no one vets the story. No one vets at all. No one does even 24 hours of investigation. And we later find out the Israelis knew probably within about 24, 36 hours that it was actually a mistake. It was Hamas's own people firing a rocket that hit outside the hospital and killed a number of people. But it's sad. This is what you get. We're not getting truth. We're just getting bits of propaganda from all different, and we're bombarded with it from all different angles. And it makes it difficult because there's no analysis. There's no analysis whatsoever. And it makes it difficult for the average, American to actually understand what is going on there and actually come up with a coherent, thought about what's really going on.
Absolutely. Phil, you had mentioned you wanted me to bring in a famous NYPD hostage negotiation, Jack Cambria. However, I felt that this is a hell of a lot of a different negotiation in a war zone. This reaches the highest levels of politics. If, in my opinion, I don't know for sure, but we're probably paying to get these hostages back. That's how they do it. They pay. It's called checkbook release. Phil.
Well, I have to agree with what Bobby said earlier. It was a strategic move. And by releasing two elderly women yesterday, and they released two young girls a couple of days before that, or younger women, I think it's, being portrayed in the media as goodwill. They're ready to negotiate. We don't know what's going on behind the scenes. And they purposely, like Bobby said, took those hostages for not only to delay the ground war, also for their protection. When the Israeli forces come in, they will have those civilians down in the tunnels with them, and they will use those hostages for protection. We know that they're launching missiles from strategic locations as well, schools, hospitals, houses of worship, mosques. So that way, when the areas where the missiles are coming from are pinpointed, perhaps the Israelis would be reluctant to strike back for fear of civilian casualties. But I want to make one other point about what Mike said with regards to the media. The propaganda that's being portrayed in the media, like for instance, we talk about the alleged hospital being blown up. The hospital wasn't hit. The missile landed in the parking area. Initially, the Palestinians were claiming that there were 500 people killed. It was more like 50, and the media just ran with it. So what they're doing is they're siding on the side of terrorists. They're empowering the terrorists. They're helping the terrorists. We need to wipe these terrorists off the face of the earth, and I think that the Israelis are ready to do it. Perhaps there's things going on behind the scenes that are holding back the ground war. Excuse me, but this is not something that Israel wanted, and I don't believe the Palestinian people wanted this as well. This is a terrorist organization that is behind this movement to try and kill Jews and to take them out. They chant kill Jews on a daily basis, and they also chant kill America. I mean, let's face it, this is what we're dealing with.
You know, Bobby, I wanted to ask you something. I know you have some experience over there also with this type of thing. One of the things that our government is saying, and I almost had to laugh when I read this in the New York Times, is that Israel doesn't have a clear plan of how to go in there and how to end this thing. Hello, we were in Afghanistan for 20 years. You know, what clear plan did we have? You know,
we didn't
let the Turk work out
to get out. Remember our withdrawal from Afghanistan?
It was horrendous.
Right.
Where was that?
So I wanted to ask you, what's the story with that? I mean,
Israel has a plan, and militarily, I'm sure they have very clear plans. However, Israel's the one country in the world that has to reach out not only to its allies and get approval, seemingly for any action it takes. They have to clear it with the U.S. They have to clear it with the rest of the West and Europe and stuff. They almost have to actually go out and ask their adversaries. They have to ask people in Lebanon if they can take some of these Palestinians in, and people in Egypt. And of course, they all say no. The rest of the Arab world turns their backs on the Palestinians in situations like this. But Israel's almost apologetic in some of its moves, but it has clear military plans. If unleashed, Israel always seems to be leashed either by the U.S. or by the West. If unleashed, believe me, the Israeli military would have a clear plan to go in, but it always seems like they have to reach out and get approval from the U.S. or approval from other Western countries before they take any action, and almost clear it with Hamas. I mean, in this situation, they told Hamas, get the Palestinian people away because we're coming in. You know, they actually broadcast. They're the only country that has to broadcast their plans. I think they have clear plans, but they always seem to be handcuffed or leashed by these many other political considerations that Israel always seems to have to navigate before they take action.
Well, it also seems that not just seems, it is a fact that without our financial backing, they're not going to be able to finance this war. Without our showing the muscle in the sea, they're not going to be able to do that. I mean, that's intimidating to these other countries that might consider getting involved. You know, this has every earmark of a war that could blow up into something much bigger. And I mean, look, when I watch Lindsey Graham and he's this huge hawk, I feel like saying, Lindsey, go strap a gun on you and you go in there. Maybe you won't be so hawkish, you know. Let's go. Let's take out the Iranian oil wells. Yeah, all right, dude. You know, calm down. You know, I think you need a little bit more diplomacy than let's take out the Iranian oil wells. You know, because there are other players behind the scene. You got Russia, you got China, right? You got Iran, you got all the Middle Eastern countries, Lebanon, you got Hezbollah. So I think that you do need some diplomacy here, and you can't just look. We know what happened on October 7th was horrific, and I'm sure the IDF is chomping at the bit to get a hold of Hamas. And right now they're being slowed down, but maybe cooler heads do need to prevail. And look, I hope they do get their pound of flesh. I really do. What happened on October 7th was horrific, but this could involve the whole world if it's allowed to. Mike?
Yeah, Billy, just think about it. Taking out the Iranian oil fields. You know, Iran does pump oil for their economy. And we had embargoes on them about 8 years ago, and those embargoes have been lifted. And they've been lifted by the president, administration, and the UN. So that's pretty sad. You do not want to unite all of the Arab world against us. We don't want another 1973 or 1979 oil embargo. I remember that as a kid. You don't want to do that. And also our own strategic oil reserves, in case of emergencies like this, they're down to the lowest they've been since the 80s. So we're in no shape to sit there and want to bomb the oil that is there. We are so oil dependent now on the Middle East. We weren't there a couple of years ago. We were actually energy independent from the Middle East. We were getting our oil from Canada and from South America. And here we are. We're stuck now. We're stuck where we are. We've put ourselves in a very precarious position in terms of our own oil needs. And if there is another oil war with the Saudi Arabians against the West, you'll see oil go for well over $100 a barrel. And that could really knock out our economy. So we're in very bad shape. We better be very careful about increasing the number of people. And I want to see any congressman that votes to go to war right now, yeah, put on a green uniform, hop over there with the IDF and join their ranks. I'm sure they'll take you.
Yeah, I mean, look, it's not a simple thing, and really,
Right.
a great point with the oil. And again, we were energy independent, but you have a lot of tree huggers that just want to get rid of oil overnight and not
Right.
take the years that it would take to transition to, a carbon-free economy. And they're doing it too quickly.
Bill,
And
we have a 50-year supply in this country that tomorrow, if they turned it off, we'd have enough in our country to supply our country for 50 years. Now, obviously, they're not going to turn it off, perhaps maybe an embargo, but we have plenty of oil. Like you said, in the new administration, they stopped any kind of processing of oil in our country. They didn't give out any permits. They're trying to buy it from other countries. Very, very counterproductive for the situation that Mike was just talking about, where they could put an embargo on us. I mean, we gave away our strategic oil reserve that we bought at a very low rate in the last administration. He gave it away when things were getting tight to keep the prices down, and we're very, very low. I think we have like an 18-day supply or something like that, which is very, very low. And as far as Lindsey Graham goes, I think talking about maybe saying, in a calm way, he gets all like Mr. Tough Guy. In a calm way, if Iran were to come into this thing, perhaps their oil wells could be targeted. If it would have been put that way in the media, perhaps it would have had a better reception or a better understanding of where we could go with this. It's putting them on notice. Don't mess around with us, or we'll just take out your oil fields. And again, it's all about messaging. And I think the messaging that the United States has been given on this particular war that's going on in Israel is terrible.
Bobby, this is one of the biggest questions, and I think you're probably the best one to answer this. This was a huge failure in intelligence. They were planning this for 2 years, and we talk about the failures of intelligence for 9/11, and there was failures there also, if you want to consider it that. But for 2 years, they were planning this, and they were basically just sort of buttering up the Israelis. Oh, we're not planning anything. Yeah, do whatever you want. And it somehow worked because they didn't hear about this. So
Yeah, I know. Yeah, I think it's I'm never a big fan of intelligence. I think the intelligence community doesn't have a lot of accountability into it. They write a lot of reports, but when they're wrong, there's not a lot of pushback on them, and they've been wrong recently in the past couple of decades in a big way. That's our own intelligence and international intelligence, and I think it combined. There's three prongs to it. I think, yes, intelligence was probably a little lacking. Combine that with Israel's always under such pressure to play nice in Palestine and to play nice in Gaza. And then you combine that with maybe, as we've seen in this country, apathy, in that nothing happens for a certain period of time and you let your guard down. I mean, I think that's natural. You have a younger generation. One of the targets of this attack on October 7th was a young people's peace music concert, so you have that attitude, that kind of appeasement attitude. And I think you combine all of those things, those three prongs, apathy, the fact that they're always on eggshells in that area, and you have a new generation that may be looking to extend an olive branch, but you can't extend an olive branch to terrorists. You can't talk to people like this.
Exactly.
You can't negotiate with them. You can't have any diplomacy with them. And the fact that the U.S. media now and international media is trying to make this this whataboutism and put Hamas on the same level as Israel, that's wrong. That we can't elevate Hamas to a state actor and say, well, Israel did this, so Hamas did that. Hamas is a terrorist organization. Israel is not. And you saw it. It drove me crazy when I saw the White House a statement the other day from the spokesperson at the White House, which when they asked her about because we're seeing what we're seeing in this country now. Let's bring it here. You're seeing Jewish people killed, followed home from synagogues, and stabbed to death. And so you're seeing this huge rise in anti-Semitism, which is always kind of boiling just under the surface, and now it just comes out. And so the White House is asked about this rise in anti-Semitism, and she can't complete a sentence. She can't complete her response about anti-Semitism without using the word and invoking the word Islamophobia. It's just she can't do it. She did. That's exactly what she did. She says, "Well, we're concerned about anti-Semitism and Islamophobia." Where is the Islamophobia? You're making that up to try to elevate them to equal status. We're seeing Jewish people in this country, in the U.S., murdered, hunted down, and murdered as they leave synagogue and things like that. We're seeing Jewish protesters beaten. There was a guy, actually a Christian guy, walking two elderly Jewish protesters back to their car, and he's set upon by these Hamas, these Palestinian, pro-Palestinian people, and beaten nearly to his death. So we're seeing this violence here in this country, this anti-Semitic violence, and all the White House can do is trying to make it an equal play. Oh, well, we don't want either that or Islamophobia. It's not Islamophobia. We're not seeing attacks.
Right. It's not one or the other. You're right. It's not one.
And to elevate that and to make that false equivalency is disgusting.
Absolutely. I want to play a little of this from CNN. This is about the intelligence failure.
Group of Hamas operatives used hardwired phones in the tunnels beneath Gaza to communicate over a period of 2 years. That's according to intelligence shared with U.S. officials. Now, those old-fashioned landlines allowed Hamas leaders to communicate underground with one another in secret. They avoided using computers or cell phones in order to keep from being tracked by Israeli or U.S. intelligence, according to these sources. And frankly, it worked, Jake. Instead, they held meetings in person among a small group, and they stayed off all digital communications. So this partially explains why Israel and the U.S. were caught so off guard by the attack, and how 1,000 Hamas fighters were able to pour across the border without being stopped, shown here in this propaganda video released by Hamas. All of this communication happened in the miles of underground tunnel system beneath Gaza that the IDF nicknamed the Gaza Metro. You heard the hostage there in the story you just played, Jake, talking about the spider web of tunnels. That's where apparently these phone lines were hardwired underground. Another way Hamas was able to keep this under the radar is that they kept the planning of the October 7th attack a secret, even from other members. Only a very small group knew about this mission until just before it was carried out. Hamas ground unit commanders and fighters were in training for many months, and they were kept in a state of general preparedness, I'm told, but only found out about the specific plans just a few days before the terrorist attack. And one of the sources said some of their training above ground was observed by Israeli officials, but did not ring major alarm bells. The thinking was, I'm told, was, oh, Hamas always trains people like this. It didn't look different. But of course, we know now, Jake, it was.
And Pamela, Israel actually found these hardwired phones in Hamas strongholds in the past, though, right?
Yeah, that's right. Israeli military found a similar kind of communication system when they raided a city in the northern West Bank over the summer, according to an Israeli official. They called this a joint operational command center, and it had hardwired communication lines and closed circuit surveillance cameras to give advance warning of Israeli troop movements. So clearly this is something that has been in their playbook. Hamas has had in their playbook, and they used it to execute this operation, as you pointed out, successfully, Jake.
All right, Pamela Brown, thank you so much. I want to bring...
Scary, right? Scary. An intelligence failure. And as you said, Bobby, you don't have that much faith in intelligence. They write a lot of reports, but they don't have a lot of power or boots on the ground type people. But, it seems like the perfect storm also for something like this to happen, because to me, the most terrifying picture from this whole October 7th thing is right here. That just is terrifying to me, because that could happen in the U.S. And the reason it could happen in the U.S. too is that, guess what? You're taking our guns from us. You are taking the guns from, I hate to go there in the Second Amendment, but I'm a retired police officer in New York State. They want me to go to a background check to buy ammo. Are you kidding me? Are you kidding me? 27 years, and you want to check me to buy ammo?
And you combine that with tens of millions of people coming across the southern border, unvetted, completely unvetted. We don't know who they are. They're coming in. We see these problems in Europe and France and places like that, where they've had a number of unvetted people. Look, I hate to say it, but it's only a matter of time. I mean, we've got army, and if you look at who's coming across the border, you just look at the videos. They're 18 to 34 single males, and they're not families. These aren't kids and families and women. These are young males of the same age as the hijackers on 9/11 or the attackers, probably the predominant attacker demographic that happened on October 7th. We don't know who these people are, and they're coming across by the millions across our southern border.
Bobby, I was talking to a friend of mine that's in the National Guard that works with Customs and Border Patrol. He was telling me there's so many people coming over. They're asking them two things: where you from and where do you want to go? And they're just shipping them out. I mean, like you said, they have no clue who they are. They could say they're from Mars, and they're just shipping them to wherever they want to go. We don't know what their criminal history could be. We don't know what groups they're affiliated with. And there have been several that were on the terrorist watch list in recent days after the war started that were trying to come over the border, that they were very happily that they were able to engage them and take them into custody. But that's giving you the signs are on the wall here, what they're looking to do.
Absolutely. And if they're Hamas sympathizers, or if they're Hamas members, all they have to do is say, I want to go to Harvard. And they'll take them up to Harvard, and they'll be able to be chanting in Harvard Yard about gas the Jews. That they can join in. Sickening. All of these protests in New York City and LA here and Harvard, and all these pro-Hamas demonstrators that clearly have no problem with beheading children and raping women in the streets.
It's incredible that these universities, these Ivy League universities with these entitled, spoiled rich kids that are protesting against our country. And then, Jewish CEOs are finally hitting back and saying, give me all the names of those jackasses that signed that. And I want to make sure they're never, ever hired. I want to play a little bit of this here.
The show, former UPenn donor David Magerman. He's co-founder and managing partner at Differential Ventures. He's the brilliant mind behind Renaissance Technologies, widely recognized as the world's most successful quant hedge fund. It's good to see you, David. What's your reaction to these 36 colleges and universities where you see pro-Hamas, pro-Palestine, anti-Semitism marches? What bothers you the most about this?
I'm not surprised. This has been something that's been developing really over the last few decades, growing on college campuses. And I think the last few years have permissioned people to say more what's on their mind. And that's bringing out a lot of opinions, including this kind of outward anti-Semitism that's becoming epidemic on campuses.
David, are you cutting ties to UPenn?
Yes, I am.
How much did you donate to them?
I probably donated between like $7 and $8 million so far.
Okay, so that's going to be a hit to them and their endowment. They sit along with Harvard University. They have very large endowments they're sitting on while they're gouging American families with constant tuition hikes. So that's been the complaint. Let's also get your reaction to HBO's Bill Maher this weekend on the pandemic of ignorance in U.S. universities among academics and students. Let's get your take on this. Watch.
Who knows the value of a liberal education, I have one piece of advice for the youth of America. don't go to college, because as recent events have shown, it just makes you stupid. There are few, if any, positives to come out of what happened in Israel, but one of them is opening America's eyes to how higher education has become indoctrination. The same students who will tell you that words are violence and silence is violence were very supportive when Hamas terrorists went on a rape and murder rampage worthy of the Vikings. They knew where to point the fingers at the murdered, and then it was off to ethics class. 34 student groups at Harvard signed a letter that said the apartheid regime is the only one to blame, proving they don't know what constitutes apartheid. If ignorance is a disease, Harvard Yard is the Wuhan wet market.
Harvard is a Wuhan wet market.
You know, amazing. But you know something? Our own government and our own, even in law enforcement, who was the, according to the politics in our country this past year, what was the biggest threat to America?
Global warming.
Well, no, white supremacists. That's what they were pushing.
Yeah.
They were pushing that bullshit.
They still
And
are.
it's absolutely untrue.
Domestic
Did you
terror.
ever meet a white supremacist, Billy? I never met one in my whole life.
Bobby, the FBI put that out there.
Yeah, the domestic terrorists are the biggest threat. It's a joke. It's an absolute joke. It's an appeasement policy where you're just saying things that your leftist overlords want to hear, and that's clear. I mean, in the FBI director, I was in New York City. I was at 1PP 3 weeks ago and got an award from the FBI director, Director Ray. But I know where his bread is buttered, and that's just an unfortunate thing.
Well, he basically has to say what they tell him to say, right?
Right. He's a Justice Department lawyer. The last 3 FBI directors have been Justice Department lawyers: Robert Mueller, James Comey, and now Christopher Wray. These guys, they've completely subjugated the FBI because they just keep plucking. And by the way, Donald Trump did too. Plucked the new FBI director out of the lawyer corps at the DOJ. They've all come from Main Justice. We haven't had a real FBI director who was a real FBI agent since Louis Freeh left. And then whenever they talk about Bill Bratton taking over the FBI, they talk about these other guys that have, huge law enforcement careers in law enforcement. But they still keep picking DOJ lawyers to run the FBI. And it's a huge mistake.
Yeah. Well, they just want someone, I think, that they can control.
Of course.
And that's the whole idea. Let's talk a little bit about this whole tunnel network in Gaza. Are you familiar with that, Bobby?
Sure. And if people really want to know how it was built, where would they get the material? Well, they got the material because Israel ships material in to Gaza to build houses, to build schools, to build schools and hospitals. And so all that material that you see there, that was all supplied by Israel to build infrastructure in Gaza for the people of Gaza. They took the water pipes and they made rocket launchers out of them because Israel supplied them with the water pipes. I mean, Israel supplies free electricity to all of Gaza, humanitarian aid to Gaza. They have two border crossings where people in Gaza come into Israel to work every day. I mean, Israel does everything they can do to help the people in Gaza, and Hamas does nothing for them except take away the aid that goes from Israel to Gaza and use it against Israel.
Mike, Professor Mike, I want to ask you a question now. A big thing, too, with holding back Israel, and I'm convinced our government is holding back Israel from this ground war, is the humanitarian thing, which is Bobby is just talking about right now, that they're very much concerned with how many civilians could lose their life. And, the propaganda, Israel turned off the electricity, they turned off the water, and they told people to move south to get the hell out of there. But I guess, and look, we know how difficult it is to get out of a congested city. We experience that in New York every Friday afternoon if you tried to leave the city. Your thoughts, Mike?
Yeah, Billy, it seems that when we know America is trying to stonewall the IDF from moving in as quickly as possible. I think the Israelis take a hard line hostage taking. I don't think they really want to deal with them. I think they just want to consider, look, we're not going to deal with the hostage with terrorists. We believe that our own people are probably already dead. We're going to move in, and you do not negotiate with these brigands. These are people who are not welcome in society. They're nothing but terrorists. We're actually stopping them. We're sharing intelligence, but the constant drip Now you're starting to see a little hostage here and hostage there. It's to try to, buy time because they know the IDF is coming, but they're trying to buy as much time as they can to make it as bloody as they possibly can. But it always seems, as Bobby picked up on this before, it always seems that people complain and talk about war crimes. They talk about Israeli committing war crimes, turning off water and food, electricity for civilian populations. That may be technically a violation of the laws of war. But no one says about the terrorists, their violations of the laws of war because they're terrorists. They don't obey laws. They don't respect laws. And so, we are trying to do this as cleanly as possible and for our own sakes, perhaps, and also for the future for Israel in terms of their relationships in the region. And maybe that's the long game to play. But it seems like it's always on Israel's shoulders to worry about the proportionality of their response. The make sure that they don't hit sensitive locations. Make sure they keep the collateral damage, including people and infrastructure, to an absolute minimum. Look, you can say all that and wish it to be, but that's not a strategy. This is a military operation. War is hell. Thousands have died already. Thousands more are going to die no matter what you do. But it's really shameful to see people talking about Israel limiting its response when they are absolutely the aggrieved party. It's sickening. It's really sickening. And
it almost sounds
shocking.
it almost sounds like policing in New York City,
Oh, absolutely. Just take it on the chin, guys. Take it on the chin. We don't want you going in there.
We used to talk about how effective street justice was, and that doesn't exist anymore.
Not at all.
For sure. Billy, earlier you and I were talking, and I kind of made a parallel to what's going on. You're in your home at 6 o'clock in the morning. Terrorists break in. They start assassinating your family, and your response is going to be criticized. I don't think so. And, the Israelis have put out leaflets and told people to get out of areas when they were going to bomb. So they're trying their best to limit civilian casualties. But as Mike just said, war is hell. There's going to be casualties. However, the Hamas started this thing. They attacked those young kids at a music festival. Think about it. And one of the things that reporter left out, that she was talking about how they were in the planning, they were also high on like a synthetic cocaine, some of them, and they were doing just horrible things to the victims, atrocities that people don't even want to talk about in the media. And, when you have that type of a thug that you're going to go up against, it's really difficult to try and fight this thing with hearts and minds. You have to go in there and you have to take them out. And that's just the bottom line.
I mean, yeah, you're right, Phil. I mean, look, Hamas has to go. I mean, if Hamas stays around after an attack like this, what else could they be capable of? They will simply rearm themselves, and they will reestablish and replan the next attack. Does anybody have any doubt that Hamas will attack again if they're not completely wiped out? If they're left to reorganize and reform? Does anyone have any doubt that if Hamas had access to 6 million Jews, how many they would have killed? There's no doubt. Hamas has to go, and the world community has to come together for that. That's what the U.S. diplomacy should be aimed at. They should be aimed at gathering support to say, we have to wipe out Hamas. They are not a state actor. They are not a legitimate political organization. They took over Palestine in 2007 and have since done nothing to improve the lives of everyday Palestinians. The Israelis have, since 2007, improved the lives of everyday Palestinians. The Hamas has done nothing, even though they run that country. They've done nothing. If Israel pulled out its support, if Israel pulled out, and by the way, we talked about like shutting off water as a war crime. It's not if it's not in your country. They were supplying free water and electricity to another country. By the way, that's hostile back at them. They don't have to provide water and electricity to Gaza, but they do. And so the lives of the Palestinians in Gaza is far better off under Israel, for Israel's efforts, than anything Hamas has ever done for them. And people just lose track of that. These people that are in this country, supporting Hamas, lose track of that. Supporting Hamas and supporting the Palestinian cause are two separate things, and we have to bifurcate that, and we can't let the media conflate those things together. Supporting a Palestinian state even and supporting Hamas are two different things. If you want to help the people in Palestine, you need to get rid of Hamas.
100%.
Bobby, it's unbelievable. Like we're talking about all these things, and in our country, we're worried about pronouns, which bathroom you use, whether someone feels safe if a cop enters a college campus. It's disgusting. How did we get here? How did we get to this? Just Mike, answer. How did we get here?
Billy, as an academic for the last 20 years, I have to say it's shameful. We failed as a society in educating our children, and especially in secondary school and in college campuses.
No, but Mike, it's been done on purpose. We didn't.
Oh,
fail.
absolutely.
They're
It's been done.
purposely brainwashing these kids to be idiots.
We failed for not pushing back, I think, is what Mike's saying.
Yeah,
We accepted it as a society, which is very, very, very dangerous. So, a cop goes into a Starbucks, people don't feel safe.
Right? It's crazy.
When I was in uniform and I went into a store on Flatbush Avenue in East Flatbush, they wanted me to stay there all day. I mean, they didn't want to let me go. So, and you feel unsafe because a uniformed police officer walks into a Starbucks. Well, we're dealing with a lot of snowflakes.
And then the same thing at these universities, Columbia University, I know for a fact, they won't even let a conservative speaker speak on their campus. And when one did get through, they actually physically attacked the stage and the guy had to flee. This is the college campuses in this country, which, let me tell you something, when they talk about the military industrial complex, how about the education industrial complex? Because our government is taking part in this big money-making scam for universities. And look, why does Harvard and these other universities need billion-dollar endowments? Why? Why do they need all that money sitting in a bank account?
Well, and I think it was UPenn, which was mentioned in that CNN story that you showed. I think that's where they have that huge China thing with the Biden administration. I think that the Biden Foundation gets an endowment from China in the hundreds of tens of millions of dollars at UPenn, I believe. So a lot of these universities have taken money from China and all kinds of things. And I think Russia just met with China. I think there's a global realignment of diplomatic relations that's happening under this administration that is extremely concerning. This realignment of Russia and China and Iran and the powers in the Middle East. I think things that haven't happened in 50 years or more. This realignment of diplomatic allies is definitely not in the best interest of the U.S.
That's for 100% sure. Folks, if you like real crime stories from a police perspective, then you're in the right place. Police Off the Cuff. And if you're not subscribed to us, go on our YouTube, hit that subscribe button, give us a thumbs up, and ring that bell. If you want to contribute to us financially, we have a Patreon with 3 different levels. We also have a YouTube channel memberships with count them, 5 different levels. You see the folks in the green font. They're part of our YouTube family, our friends, our subscribers, and we really appreciate them. You see, folks, this isn't exactly a crime story, but it's one of the most important stories of our time. And you see how passionate we get about this because we love this country, we love law enforcement, and we love the civil rights that we have in this country, which has been eroded. And we hate to see it in a democratic society like Israel, something like this happening. And even when, when I read the chat, there's infiltrators here that come in and hate us because we're taking the part of Israel. That's okay. Come on in the chat and say whatever you'd like.
Billy, could I just piggyback what Bobby was just saying? This took place at a time when America was overextended with Ukraine, which is a whole nother story. Why we're even behind that war is really got me puzzled. We have a very low amount of oil in the strategic reserve. We have at least 5 or maybe 7 million people came over the border in the last 2 years. We have no idea who they are. And I really believe that the timing was such that perhaps we're going to have another election in 2024, and we may wind up with a different president. And they realized we have to strike now. The United States is not in a good position. Our military's been decimated over the last couple of years. We don't have enough forces to cover all these different, different conflicts that are going on. And I think that that's why they chose this time to move. And like I said earlier, the messaging, I saw the Secretary of Defense, Lloyd Austin, on the news over the weekend. He looked terrified. That told me something. He was talking in very, very concerning terms. And that really scared me. That made me very concerned that he's the Secretary of Defense. If he's scared, I think we should all be scared.
100. Hey, when I see guys like that guy Milley, that's worried about pronouns too, that fat general should get out of the military.
I think he's out. I think he's either
Well,
retired or he's retiring at the end of the year, but don't let the door hit him in the ass.
Wokeness hit the military too. It's disgusting. Darlene Dunlop, thank you first of all for the $4.99 super sticker. Great point. It helps nothing when the UN Secretary General comes out and basically says it's Israel's fault.
Disgusting.
And they wanted the UN to go investigate the hospital bombing. Yeah, let's get the Gambino crime family to investigate the bananas. You know, well, what are you kidding me?
Disgusting.
Unbelievable. So, one of the things, Bobby, I wanted to mention also is the ground war, this urban warfare. One of the most difficult things anyone in the military could do, because it is a guerrilla war, because Hamas is already there. They're dug in. They got the element of surprise. The Israelis are coming in probably with unbelievable firepower, but still lots of people are going to die. And one of the most difficult things to do, and it seems like the U.S. is trying to prevent Israel from taking this next move.
You're muted.
We know that, as Mike said earlier, there's going to be collateral damage, and not only will there be collateral damage, any collateral damage is going to be amplified by the media to show the first Palestinian mother that's killed is going to be front page news all over the world, all over the U.S. They'll probably have her family somewhere in the U.S. being interviewed, crying on camera what the terrible Israelis did, right? And look, I feel for any innocent casualty of any conflict. But the fact is that the longer we allow Hamas to exist, the longer these types of things will happen. The next one will be worse than this one. They will regroup and they will replan, they will rearm. As long as you let them exist, they have a stated purpose of killing Jews and wiping the state of Israel off the map. That's their stated purpose. They don't have anything. They don't want to live in harmony with the Israelis. That's not their purpose. Their charter says kill Jews and wipe Israel off the face of the earth. They don't recognize the Israelis' right to exist, even though, God, every time I see that word occupation, that land was the Israelis 3,000 years ago. The Jews had that land. The Jews are the indigenous people of that area. You can't say that they're occupiers simply because they came back in 1947 after being displaced for thousands of years. That's their land. They are the indigenous population of that land, and so they are not an occupying force. They are the indigenous people of that land, and so stop using the term occupation. Stop using that Israel is an occupying force. That is their land. They gave up part of it for Palestine, which none of the other Arab nations wanted to take in the Palestinians, and then they had to establish Gaza basically as a buffer zone because the people next door wanted to kill them. Imagine living next to somebody whose stated purpose is to kill you and rape your wife and kill your kids. Imagine living right next door. Wouldn't you want to build a fence? Wouldn't you want to maybe build a buffer zone, put a big hedge between you and the house next door? I mean, that's what Israel lives with. They live next door to somebody who is sworn to their destruction.
The funny thing, and not funny, but one of the things is Jewish people, they're usually very liberal politically.
Yeah.
And Israelis are a little different. Most of them are a little more conservative because they live with this. We used to say on the NYPD, the definition of a conservative is a liberal that just got mugged. And we used to say that because as soon as you get mugged, your whole perspective changes. I'm dating myself using the term mug. I don't think they even use that anymore. Do they, Phil?
I listen, mugged, robbed, yoked.
Yoked was a cool one back in the
yoked
day.
out. It definitely changes your perspective when you get set upon by a wolf pack and you get robbed and beaten. So your whole perspective changes. Believe me.
Oh, Phil,
and
that's a no-no term too. Wolf pack. You can't describe.
They exist.
Animals,
they exist till today. I don't care what they called them. There's plenty of wolf packs. There was this. I think it was in Baltimore. There was a city councilwoman who was for defund the police by millions of dollars, and recently she was robbed right outside of our home.
She was carjacked.
Right. Carjacked, robbed. She was bloodied too. So I think that her perspective may have changed after something like that. And I don't want to rub it in. That's not a nice thing. But the bottom line
I want to rub it. I want to rub it.
Okay, you rub it in, Bill. But the bottom line is that we need the police. We need protection from people that are going to commit crimes, and anybody that says defund the police. I mean, come on.
You know, if I was president, I would have every Ivy League kid drafted right now and send them right to Israel.
Look, I think that there's a real possibility that this, what we're seeing now, the support for Hamas in the U.S. grows here. There's going to be some incidents here that our homegrown law enforcement will have to deal with. We don't have an IDF that goes in. It's going to fall on and probably on some big city police departments like NYPD, like LAPD, like Chicago PD, like Miami PD. I think we're going down that road between the support you're seeing for Hamas in the streets of the U.S., between the open border where millions of unvetted people are coming in. If Hamas or ISIS or the Taliban wanted to attack the U.S., all they had to do was send people through the southern border in the last 2 years. And who's to say they haven't? And we have seen an increase in the people on the terrorist watch list getting caught, coming across the border. Well, for every one we catch, how many make it through? So I don't, they're going to be here. They're patient. They play the long game. We saw in the piece you showed that Hamas was probably planning this for 2 years. Who's not to say that they're planning something in the U.S. for 2 years from now? They certainly have
to pay for their hotel rooms.
Yeah, that's right. We're probably providing them with the transportation.
Bobby is so right, because Saturday night in Bay Ridge, there have been several protests around the city since the war started on the 7th. Saturday night, there was a pro-Palestinian, I'm going to call it a riot. It wasn't a protest, where police officers were attacked. They made about 18 or 19 arrests, and they were out within a few hours. That's the scary thing. They see what happened a few years ago with the George Floyd riots. Nobody was held accountable. They took over cities, burnt police cars, attacked police officers, caused all kind of mayhem and looting. And what was the result? Barely anybody went to jail. I mean, you had lawyers firebombing a police car, arrested, and they got a slap on the wrist. So again, why wouldn't they do the same thing? They did. They got a little out of control the other night. It became a riot. They attacked police officers. The videos are online. Anybody could look them up. And within hours, they were all out of jail.
And they're studying us. They're studying. If they can see what one random psychopath can do in Las Vegas and kill 60 people, or how many at that music concert. If one guy can carry that out, what do you think they're thinking they can do to us around a holiday season like Christmas, where there's public gatherings all over the country, or another holiday where there's all these public gatherings, or a series of outdoor concerts or stuff? What do you think they're not watching us and learning from that? It's scary. And like I said, American law enforcement needs to start getting ready, because I can't see how it's not going to happen here.
Bobby, I agree with you. They need to get ready, but they also need to have the chains taken off them, because they're not even allowed to do their job anymore.
No,
and they know that.
The minute you try to do something, the word Islamophobia gets thrown around. Look, I know it happened. I know at least 3 FBI agents prior to 9/11 who had cases against guys who, and we all know them now, that these guys they're trying to learn how to fly planes and not want to land or take off with them. And they wrote to FBI headquarters, we want to go up on wiretaps. We want to get more aggressive. And FBI headquarters said, no, that's too aggressive. We don't want to be accused of Islamophobia. Well, and look what happened. So the guys in the field were saying back to FBI headquarters, we want to do this, but we have this fear of fear. Really, it's fear of being criticized that our leaders in Washington, our leaders, at least in the FBI in Washington, are so risk averse that they didn't want to approve advanced and a little more aggressive investigative tactics. Well, those days should be over by now, because if you don't think it can happen here, it can happen here.
Right, it's coming. And you see our government, you see the squad, all 4 of them should all be just kicked out of Congress. They're just outrageous that people like that are in our government. Just outrageous. Professor Mike, I could see the wheels turning in your head.
Now, I have a favorite expression is ideology over intelligence, over common sense. It's pushing an ideology to fund the police. Well, guess what? You defund the police in these big cities. Guess who's going to get hurt? Poor white, Hispanic, and black people, because the same people that come from those neighborhoods are the hunters, and they're the predators, and they're getting released back into those neighborhoods. And we see in Washington D.C. just the other day, the mayor is like, we have to show that people take a hard line against criminals. But weren't you the one who was like trying to defund the police a couple of years ago?
Yeah.
And now once it gets to a boiling point where they realize, oh my goodness, I made a mistake. They'll never admit their mistake. And then 2, they'll use the words and say the words, but they'll never back it up. We've gone past the pale. We've gone beyond the pale. Everyone knows, from Mayor Adams in New York City, from the governor, they know what they need to do. They can't bring themselves to do it. They are ideologically driven, and they don't pay the price because they have, armed security. Although occasionally one of them gets carjacked, but they don't feel it. They don't feel it. They don't live in those neighborhoods. They're totally out of touch, and it's ideology over intelligence.
And I think 2 things have happened recently in the past few years that really put us behind the 8 ball. And I know I put down intelligence earlier, but look, I have some of my best friends are on JTTF in New York. That's the original JTTF, started in 1979. The best FBI agents and detectives in the world populate that unit. We do need intelligence. We need good intelligence. And unfortunately, when budgets are cut, one of the first things that's cut is intelligence, because it doesn't produce, right? They're not interfacing with the public. Uniform people, they push more uniforms out in the field. They want the public to see cops and stuff like that. Intelligence and other things like that are what's a lot of times subject to budget cuts, because it really doesn't. It's like in a private company, it's not revenue producing. Well, in law enforcement, intelligence doesn't really show to the public. You can't and sometimes it's classified and you can't even tell the city councils and stuff like that. That plus, not only did we have a defunding, but we had a demilitarizing of the police, right? So, oh my God, you can't have armored personnel carriers. Oh my God, you can't have AR-15s, like that. Even the police can't have that, right? I remember years ago, one of my friends was in a highway unit, Highway 2, I think, and they had to get rid of all their leather jackets and their boots because it looked too military. It was, and this is years ago in New York. Highway 2 or highway units had to kind of like militarize their uniform. Remember, they used to have all the leathers and stuff, the cool stuff, and so because it was too sensitive. And I think that movement of defunding the police, demilitarizing the police, and is going to come home to roost, because when you have a lack of intelligence, it takes years to build that up again. Your confidential human sources and things like that, it's generational. Once you lose it, it takes a long time to get that back. We saw that in the late 70s when Jimmy Carter cut the CIA almost in half and released the names of worldwide sources. He had 18 people that I know of killed worldwide who were sources for the intelligence community at least. And it took a generation of CIA, new CIA agents to build up again under Reagan, when Reagan kind of reestablished their budget. But it takes a long time to reestablish a good, firm intelligence network and intelligence operation. And, I'm just, I can't tell you how fearful I am of what's going to happen the next 4, 6, 8 years in this country, based on what's happening overseas, combined with what's happening at our southern border. It's going to be too late when we start seeing these things happen. And who's going to pay the price? People, men and women in uniform, in blue. They're going to be the front line again. And it's not going to be one psychopath in a hotel room. It's going to be more substantial than that.
Well, what was the place in India where they had like 8 shooters went to different locations?
Oh, the
And they just-
hotel. That
It was
the-
at that hotel,
Different hotels, yeah.
Yeah,
and
yeah.
they just killed people for like a couple of hours because their
Hours.
police couldn't take them down. They
Right.
didn't have the firepower, they didn't have the training, and they just killed people for hours. And it
Was
was
that
like,
Indonesia, maybe?
yeah, it was in. I forget the name.
No, it was in
of
India. It was I
Mhm.
think it was in India, and can't remember the name of the hotel that happened. I remember because they came in on ribs. They came up the river in inflatable boats, and they hopped out and they went in because a couple of friends of mine did the crime scene at that hotel. It
And
was
then, Bobby, I always said that could happen in Times Square. Absolutely happen in Times Square. And of course, I'm not wishing for it, but you can't move around in Times Square. So the response would take forever to get there, even though I think they have an ESU presence in Times Square now, maybe because of that. But how many guys would you need? With something like that, you'd need a force of guys to respond to something.
well,
like
and
that.
if they're planning on something like that, who do you think they're going to take out first?
Yeah.
And they're a very visible presence. I was in Times Square a couple of weeks ago for the first time in 20 years. I made my way back to New York City, and I saw an ESU truck sitting there. But if they're doing pre-attack surveillance, they're going to know who to take out first, and
Right.
that's and unfortunately, they'll learn that lesson, and
They'll recon the location and they'll figure out how to get around it. You're
Yep,
making a good point, Bob.
Yeah.
Phil, want to take care of this here?
Sure. Joe Murray, attorney at law. Now, listen, guys, if you find yourself in a jam and you're in need of legal counsel in the New York City area, there is no better criminal defense attorney than Joe Murray. Joe Murray is not only a great criminal defense attorney, he's also a retired 15-year member of the NYPD, and he was on the boxing team. So if he takes your case, perhaps he could deliver that knockout punch. If you want to get a hold of Joe, his website is jmurray-law.com. His telephone number is 646-838-1702. You can email Joe at jmurray-law.com. Joe is a big supporter of Police Off the Cuff Real Crime Stories, and we think he's a terrific criminal defense attorney.
Very well done, Phil. So one of the biggest points I think of this whole thing is that there's no doubt, I think, that, and this is sort of our little dissertation here, is that the U.S. is holding Israel back right now from conducting this ground war. And it's understandable if they can save some of these hostages, because I believe that once they go in, it's all over for the hostages. Your thoughts, Bobby?
I agree. But at the same time, it's what is our intelligence on the ground telling us about how many of those hostages are still alive? I think some of them are, because I think you're right. I think that that's what they want to do. I think, as we've spoken about, I think that they want to dribble them out, release a couple of them every couple of days to kind of keep that hope alive. And every time they do that, like I said, I'm sickened by the fact that the media picks up on this as some kind of humanitarian gesture, some olive leaf that Hamas is like reaching out with. I mean, it's dumbfounding that you could think that people that just beheaded babies are capable of holding out an olive branch. I mean, that's just not happening. It's purposeful for them. It's strategic for them. But you're right. I mean, we do have to figure out, and hopefully that's what they're doing. How can we go in and do almost a hostage rescue first? Let's figure out where the hostages are and neutralize them as much as we can and do a hostage rescue first, because I think they only had maybe 100 or 200 hostages. That's, I mean, they probably spread them out a lot, but if they've got decent intelligence, I think they can work around that. They have been very successful in taking out some of Hamas leadership. Unfortunately, the big Hamas leadership lives in Doha, in Qatar. That's where their big financing comes from. But I think that on the ground in Gaza and in Palestine as well, the Israelis done a good job the last 2 weeks in taking out some of the Hamas leadership. But they've got to get boots on the ground. They've got to get those foot soldiers for Hamas neutralized, and Hamas has to be wiped out, at least on the ground in Palestine and in Gaza. And then the international community really needs to come together and cut out the heart of Hamas that's in Qatar and other places in the Middle East. That's obviously a much more difficult task, and it really falls on the responsibility of the international community to do that. Now, whether or not they have the will, that's another question.
You know what's funny, Bobby? There was no pushback when they wanted to eliminate ISIS, another terrorist organization. But for some reason, Hamas, there's just this uproar amongst. It's not only just in the United States on the college campuses; it's throughout the world. There's protests going on. I just wish that somebody would show these kids some of those tunnels and explain to them that these tunnels were built with supplies that were meant to build an infrastructure in the Gaza Strip, and however they just used it for further their terrorist activities.
Absolutely. Angel D, thank you so much for the $5 super sticker. My father passed away a few years ago. When I listened to Sergeant Bill, it's like hearing my dad talk sense into me. Thank you all. Angel, thank you so much. That really means a lot. Yeah. Not just to me, to all of us. You see, we're all old fuckers on this show, you know?
Yeah.
Hope you didn't mind. I hope you didn't mind my French there, but
that's good.
It wouldn't have been. It wouldn't have had the same effect if I used any other word. You know. Yeah, I mean, Bobby, you know, it is terrifying because and your warnings for a well-traveled FBI agent that's been all over the world, well-educated, you've seen things, you've worked 9/11, you've been in Afghanistan, Iraq, you've been all over the place, and you know what's going on. You want to hear something funny? My uncle was the U.S. ambassador to Lebanon under Ronald Reagan appointed him. It was 1989, I think it was. My uncle John McCarthy. Yeah, he was appointed. And my grandmother was in the White House, and Reagan said to her, "Mrs. McCarthy, you must be very proud of your son." She goes, "I never had any problem with any of my kids." That was a response to the President of the United States, you know. But
that's a real good mom, though. Listen to
I never, you know, she's an old lady, and she didn't.
Her kids could do no wrong. That's
and the moment didn't mean shit to her. Yeah, you're talking about my kids, yeah. Right, well, that's great. Anyway, yeah, because he had pictures with himself and Yasser Arafat, who used to be the head of the PLO, which I guess was a precursor of Hamas, right?
Well, I mean, not exactly. Actually, Hamas did not get along with the PLO in the early stages when Hamas was forming. Now, there's the history of Hamas. People think it just started. It may be in its current form, but they were the leadership of Hamas, and as it formed over the decades. I mean, there were people that were really in the early stage of Hamas meeting with Adolf Hitler in 1930s. In 1939, particularly, there was a summit that Hitler had, and some of the people that were in the precursor organizations of Hamas were meeting with Hitler and stuff. And so, like, Hamas is considered like this newer organization, and it is technically in its current version, but its iterations, its historical iterations, go far back, and they've always been hell bent on destroying the Jewish state and killing as many Jews as they can.
What about Iran?
It's just amazing how history repeats itself, and we all study history and the Holocaust, and you know the Jews always say never again, never. My mother-in-law is a Holocaust survivor. She was in Theresienstadt concentration camp when she was like 4 years old, lost the whole family. So it's amazing how anything like this could even remotely happen again. And it's happening again. It's incredible. And how we cannot, or people can think of not coming to the aid of the good guys in this. And in my view, the Israelis are the good guys in this case. And, you know, I'm sure we'll get some hate in the chat. That's okay. Bring it. We're used to it. NYPD, we're used to the hate. But bring the love too, all right? You know, I'm going to go around.
Earlier in the show, you said something about, you know, taking your guns away. And I saw a quote, a meme recently that said, people with ARs don't get on train cars.
People with ARs don't what?
Don't get on train cars. Huh. And if you think about it, that's a pretty powerful, you know, thought.
That's right. That's right.
Yeah. Scary.
It is scary. It's
when you arm the population, you open up the possibility of those totalitarian regimes coming in. When the first if you look at history, any totalitarian regime that took over, one of the very first moves they did was to de-arm their population.
Yeah,
I mean, you have to
indoctrinate the kids and de-arm the population.
Yeah, and
you know, I always remember the quote from Lenin, and not John Lennon, Lenin, Lenin, who said, in regards to capitalist countries, we will buy the rope from you that we use to hang you.
Yeah. Yeah.
That's right.
Yeah.
It makes a lot of sense when you think about it, and that's what they're doing, you know?
I have all the utmost respect for people's right to protest and people's right to speak their minds on any topic. I'm very, very strong about that. But when you start really kind of attacking people, because if you look at all the Israeli protests and Israeli support demonstrations, they're peaceful, and the Israeli people are peaceful. I'm talking about it here in the U.S. And when you see the pro-Palestinian ones, it's not the same. The tenor is different. The attitude is different. It feels different. You can look at them on video and look at the news. It feels different. Now, the news covers them the same and tries to equate them, but it's a different tenor and tone when you see a pro-Israeli demonstration and a pro-Palestinian, which is now morphed into pro-Hamas demonstrations here in this country. And there is a difference, and they shouldn't be conflated. There are two different things. They shouldn't be equalized. This is not a war of one against another. This is a terrorist organization that the likes of which we've rarely seen. And operationally, they're capable. And they're not just capable of hitting Israel. They're capable of hitting us as well, and we need to remember that.
Absolutely. You know, Bobby, you're talking about the Palestinian demonstrators being violent, and then I see the NYPD cops. The poor cops don't have helmets on. They're wearing the soft hats at a violent demonstration. That is another thing that our politicians don't give a shit about the police. They really don't care what happens to them.
It's optics, right? Why is that? Why are they not wearing a helmet? Why not no hats?
They're being held back because of all the rhetoric in the past. And listen, I think that if a cop has a helmet and a baton in his hand, it might put a different mindset on the protester. I'm not going to throw an egg or a bottle or a rock at a cop with a helmet on that's like, he's wearing a helmet, and it changes the whole dynamic. Unfortunately, the politicians in New York City, they cave to the ACLU and to all the lawsuits that are brought against. Every time there's a demonstration or a riot, there's lawsuits, and they pay them out. So again, they don't want cops that are going to be swinging nightsticks with helmets on. They want people to be out there to get injured, unfortunately. And this is what we have to try and change. We have to go proactive at these things. And listen, you can't make arrests at a violent riot protest and let them out within a couple hours. You got to hold them in jail for a few days. Let them know they're going to get their asses in jail for a few days, and maybe next time they'll think twice.
Let them smell central booking.
Yeah, really.
Let them smell that facility.
Let them eat bologna sandwiches and for a couple of days. You'll see how fast they don't do it. No more.
Yeah. I remember this Hollywood activist one time got arrested, and my father-in-law was like, "Oh, she's the real deal." I said, "What? I go, that piece of shit will be out in 2 hours." I go, "Let her smell central booking for 3 days. A whole act will change,
Yeah. She won't be so outspoken anymore.
No, she won't be so, oh, I want to protest, you arrest me, get me some photos of getting guys. We're at an hour and 12 minutes. I'm going to go around and we give you your last thoughts. Bobby's from the West Coast. He's got probably going swimming, surfing. I don't know what he's doing. He's got some more
scuba
more light. He's got some more light left. Phil, I'll go to you first.
I just want to say thank you to Bob. Bob, you brought a lot of information tonight. There should have been more FBI guys like you. I know guys that worked with you and you were very easy to get along with when you were over in Brooklyn South Homicide. The FBI has taken a strong hit over the last few years with some of the stuff that's going on up at the top, but there are many other good agents like yourself, I'm sure. And thank God for that. The FBI is lauded as the best police department or agency in the United States and in the world. And I think that that's very true. Again, with this war, a lot we went through tonight. Listen, I don't want to see one more person die. This is a terrible thing that's going on. But unfortunately, Israel has to take Hamas out. I hope there's not any collateral damage. One is going to be too many. But unfortunately, war is hell. We went through that. And I think it's just a fact that sooner rather than later, they should go in. I hope the U.S. doesn't hold them back anymore. Maybe there is some negotiation going on. I don't know. But I'd like to see it get started and get it over with.
Professor Mike.
Bill, I just want to say again, thank you to Bobby Chacon, because you mentioned several times the false moral equivalency of comparing the IDF and Israel, the state of Israel, to Hamas, which is a terrorist. One is a persona non grata throughout history, throughout mankind. You do not deal with these sort of pirates, brigands, terrorists, baby killers. Absolutely not. They need to be eradicated. I'm sorry, but they are human, but they need to be eradicated because they dedicated themselves to wiping you out. And it appears that we're trying to keep the IDF on their heels. They should be leaning forward. They should be ready to go, and we should just tell them to go and back them up militarily, with intelligence, with some financing, and also politically. And we're not doing it. And that is the most scariest thing I've ever seen. I've never seen this sort of you never saw this with the PLO after the 72 Munich riots, Munich killings, or anything like that. This is the first time, Phil even said it, that you're seeing a terrorist organization getting good press. And that is shocking.
Isn't that amazing? That's amazing. Bobby, your final thoughts, and don't start with 7 years ago.
Well, I will say this just because Phil brought it up. I'd be remiss if I didn't give a shout out to my old two partners in Brooklyn South Homicide, Bobby Powell and Willie Bishop. My partner in the 6-7, who was Jack Winane. My partner in the 7-7, who was Mike Paul. Back in the 80s and 90s when we were doing the Jamaicans and I was working the West Indian.
I know every one of those guys.
Oh, really? Yeah, they were
good people.
They were solid. We cleared a lot of homicides in federal RICO cases for those guys, and they did great in bringing those cases to the table, and so it was great. So my takeaway is more local. I see what's happening in the world, and it's terrible. My concern is for, as it always is, for the men and women of law enforcement in the United States. And if you don't think there's going to be a trickle effect down here, just look at the protests. As Phil said, and Mike said, look at the protests that are going around this country, U.S. Look at where they're saying gas the Jews, where they're protesting, pro Hamas. It's never been seen before. And like I said, I hate to bring this up again, but the southern border, these unvetted millions that have come in. If your enemy wants to do you damage, and they don't only want to attack, Israel, obviously, they want to attack us because of our support for Israel. And so if they want to attack us, they know how to do it. They know our border is open. They know how to get in here, infiltrate organizations. And I fear for the men and women in law enforcement in this country, who may be at the front lines when this does come here. And that's why I wholly support wiping Hamas out as an organization, not leaving one living member of them on the face of the earth, because I do support Israel, but I'm more fearful for our own country here, and they will come and they will strike at us if they think they can.
Absolutely. I want to thank all three of you guys for coming on this show, because if you didn't, it would just be me here talking, and I'm not as knowledgeable as Bobby Chacon at least about this topic. But Bobby, thank you so much. I didn't mean to tease you about the left coast. I know it's a great place to live, California. That's all right. We have to have a little humor on this show too.
No, that's fine. I love hanging out with you guys. It's like old home week. It's like it's like family.
The only thing that's missing are the Coronas, But then we might not get too smart with some of our remarks.
What's going on here?
All right, guys. This is Police Off the Cuff, Real Crime Stories. Folks, thank you for tuning in. On behalf of Police Off the Cuff, I'm Bill Cannon, Phil Grimaldi, Michael Geary, and retired FBI agent Bobby Chacon. Thank you so much for tuning in. Have a great night.
Stay safe, everyone.
Thanks, guys.
One episode